I think it's safe to say no one expected Turkey versus Georgia to be the best game of the Euros so far. And a lot of this was down to some extremely creative attacking football by Turkey, but it did leave them exposed at the back. Let's take a look. Arda Guler announced his arrival at the Euros in spectacular fashion with what is arguably goal of the Euros so far, taking the top spot from his teammate that scored in the first half. But the reason why Arda Guler was so good in this match was also down to some really clever rotations that allowed him to pick up the ball in some dangerous spaces. So Turkey lined up in a 4-2-3-1 while Georgia were in a 3-5-2. Now the back three is turning out to be an extremely common formation at the Euros. So let me know if we should do a breakdown of why so many teams are choosing this system in this competition. So in the first half, Georgia's game plan was extremely clear and they wanted to counterattack, and they did this by starting in a 5-3-2 formation. But Turkey were able to control possession for the vast majority of the time, and a lot of this was down to some really clever positional rotations by the three midfielders in Ayhan, Calhanoglu and Guler. So while you have the two fullbacks starting out wide, in reality they pushed up quite a lot, and Turkey's secret was how they exposed these spaces either side of Georgia's midfield. Now while you'd expect the fullbacks to maybe pick up the ball in these positions and want to push forward themselves, in reality it was the rotations of Guler and Ayhan moving into these positions either side of the centre backs that really allowed them to stretch Georgia's defence and pick up some really interesting positions in attack. If the ball moved out to Guler, for example, you would notice that Georgia's midfield was quite slow to close him down. Depending on which player wanted to cover this space here, it would free up other players in the middle that they often did find with more penetrating passes. But as he had space to push up, and he did push up, it created a lot of interesting combinations on the flanks between the fullback out wide holding the width, Guler in the half space, and even Calhanoglu pushing up and giving a lot of support. And you ended up with these really interesting triangles on the edge of the box. Now from this position, Guler's left foot was extremely dangerous as well, and we saw in the first half that he was able to whip in some really dangerous crosses, able to pick out the players in the box. And because they had so many players ready to attack forward in the fullback, the opposite winger in Yildiz, the attacking midfielder and the striker, there were already so many players ready to attack the box, and these crosses turned out to be an avenue that Turkey looked to exploit quite a lot in the first half. But it wasn't just on the right flank, and if we move over to the left flank, we can notice that there was a lot of positional rotations as well. Specifically, it was the other holding midfielder in Ayhan allowing the fullback Calhanoglu to push up on the left flank. Now, these rotations between Calhanoglu and Yildiz were also extremely interesting because it wasn't linear in the sense that the fullback always picked up this position, but sometimes he would attack the half space in this position here, Yildiz would be out wide. But in other situations as well, the attacking midfielder Kokcu would also move over into these positions, and you get a lot of different players involved in these rotations between the lines, which meant it was really difficult for Georgia to predict which spaces they needed to effectively cover. Because all it took was one ball forward, in this case into the holding midfielder, and you had a lot of players ready to attack in behind. And it's exactly these types of rotations that led to Turkey's first goal. And if we look at it, there's so many different players in positions you might not necessarily expect. While these positions aren't necessarily groundbreaking in the sense that maybe club teams adopt these types of positional rotations more frequently, they are quite rare at national level because it takes a lot of understanding between the players to know which positions they need to pick up. It's one of the reasons why England's attacks versus Serbia were very static, because while there was attempts at these positional rotations, other players around them, the players that were making these movements, didn't pick up the correct positions that they needed to on the pitch. But Turkey were able to do this very effectively throughout the first half and the second half. Now, another really interesting thing that Turkey were able to do was free up their key player Calhanoglu. Now, we've seen how dangerous he can be for Inter from these deep-lying positions here, and we often saw crosses coming from really deep positions, playing balls into the box, trying to catch the defense off guard, but Georgia did defend these opportunities quite well. But it was the fact that they were able to get him involved in the attacking move, and he was able to comfortably rotate forward between the lines, that meant that Turkey were able to really create a lot of dangerous opportunities and really interesting opportunities in the first half. So essentially in the first half, the combinations of the three midfielders in Ayhan, Calhanoglu and Guler were extremely dynamic, and it made Turkey really fun to watch because you never knew exactly where these chances were going to come from. If it was from Calhanoglu pushing forward between the lines, if it was from Guler dropping deep and maybe delivering a ball out wide and then the fullbacks overlapping, there were so many different combinations. Even the striker Yilmaz was never just central. You often saw him pick up positions out wide while the fullback moved inside. Maybe Guler was in the half space again, or even Guler was out wide, and the striker would come into this position here. Now, while these rotations were extremely effective and they were able to take control of the match, there was a massive flaw in Turkey's plan, and that was exactly what Georgia wanted, which was counter-attacking football. And you can see exactly that by having your fullbacks push forward onto the flanks and trying to hold the width, with these midfielders often dropping deep and then maybe attacking forward as well, it left a lot of space on the flanks that Georgia wanted to take advantage of and did take advantage of. When Turkey lost the ball, you saw them adopt an extremely aggressive counter press, and a lot of the times this was successful with the midfielders really pushing forward and wanted to close down this space effectively. But when it wasn't effective and they lost the ball, you'd end up with a lot of runs into the channels. For example, if it was on the left flank, then Napoli's player Kvaratskhelia would run into these channels here and then he'd attack forward quite consistently. Now, his dribbling wasn't perfect in this match. A lot of opportunities he had when he was pushing against the defensive line. He trying to beat his man and unfortunately wasn't able to. But Georgia were extremely dangerous from these situations. Now, what was also really interesting about Georgia's counterattacks is that they realized that the space wasn't only on the side where the ball was, but the opposite flank had so much space that they could exploit. And you often see that if they were able to play it through the press, they'd find so much space on the opposite flank for similar situations, with the wing back or the midfielders pushing forward before Turkey's defense really got time to set up and establish themselves in defense. And their equalizer did come from a very similar situation of Georgia moving the ball really well from one flank to the other and then attacking the box on the front post to make it 1-1 going into half time. Now, in the second half, both teams kept a similar blueprint, with Turkey maintaining possession and being on the front foot, while Georgia were looking to create the majority of their chances with counterattacks. And this was the case until Arda Guler put them ahead with an incredible finish from outside the box. Now, while Guler's goal in itself didn't come from a specific structured attack with these rotations, it was more of a counter-pressing situation. If we rewind a few seconds, we can see how Turkey created these big clusters of players in certain areas of the pitch, with lots of players rotating their position and constantly attacking forward behind the defense or dropping deep to pick up the ball, which again created these really interesting dynamic structures that were fun to watch and made the game really exciting for both teams because it did leave them exposed at the back. So once Turkey went ahead, the game shifted and Georgia went on the front foot, and they adopted a much more aggressive either 3-2-5 offensive shape, and a lot of the times it was even a 3-1-6. The biggest change in the second half was that Kvaratskhelia wasn't used so much out wide on the flanks, but was a lot more present in the half spaces and in the center of the pitch, and they would often look to play the ball into him here where he could drive forward and attack the defense with other players running forward. And it was from these positions that Georgia were able to create some really dangerous opportunities, especially when they were in this 3-1-6 formation, because they just went all out attack. And a lot of these dangerous chances came with balls straight through the center into the striker or into Kvaratskhelia, with in this case the number 6, again apologies for the pronunciation, I'm not even going to try and attempt this, would make runs forward and try and pick up the ball here with a really big chance coming soon after Turkey scored their goal. So this was the theme from once Turkey went ahead. Georgia were on the front foot, putting everything they had going forward and trying to create chances in a lot of different ways, coming from crosses or from shots from the edge of the box. However, Georgia weren't able to break through, and Turkey finished off the match with essentially the last kick of the game and put an end to arguably the best game of the Euros I've personally seen so far. And it felt like a breath of fresh air watching these two teams go for it for 90 minutes, because after having watched France, Portugal and England, teams that you'd consider favourites for the Euros, their attacks were a lot more static and maybe a lot more predictable and didn't lead to the most exciting games that as neutrals is what we want from the Euros. But I'm curious to know your thoughts of this match in the comments down below, and which players did you really enjoy watching. So if you enjoy this type of content, I'm going to be doing a live stream tomorrow. We're going to be watching England versus Denmark. So make sure to click the link in the description down below if you want to check out some live tactical analysis of all the latest games at the Euros. Thanks for watching.